Very good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar workshop study on the Tripple One concept. It's 10 o'clock Central European Time, which is our starting date for today's session. And we will have 3 hours, maximum 3 hours session of presenting and discussing this topic. My name is Jan Walter. I'm the project lead of this study, and I have with me the whole team of the study, which is working or which has been working throughout the past year on this topic. And so just to present, it's with me Jehab Salih, Rainer Flicker, Caroline Schlemmer, Rafael Sarete Cardenas, and Stefan Wichmann. And we have also on the line our partners and subcontractors in the study, Davy van Hifte, Harald de Borger, and Yves Brouwers from Brussels Airport, who will also present their insights on their experience on implementing the Tripple One concept at their airport in Brussels. So yes, as I said, my name is Jan Walter. I'm from the company Airside. I'm here the head of Aerodrome Safety and Operations section. We are international aviation consultancy and training organization based in Berlin. And so we have actually plenty of registrations for today's session. I've just looked through the list of registration. Was more than 220 registrations, so it's a quite huge group, huge audience. And so really exciting to present our interim results and the outlook for this study during today's session. So first of all, maybe some words on the objective of today's session, because I think it's there are some expectations and the community on this topic, as it is highly discussed and controversially discussed throughout the last years. So the first intention objective is to give you a feedback and an overview of the current status of the study. So it's a 2-year study which started a bit more than 1 year ago. So we are halfway down now, and we will have 1 year ahead to, let's say, wrap up the insights and input and information we collected so far, and to drive some conclusions out of this and provide recommendations to the regulatory body. So it's preliminary results what we will show you today. So we won't be in the position to provide and let's say wrap up some final conclusions yet, as we will have certainly some more work to do and to, let's say, sort and analyze all this information to really give profound and robust conclusion and feedback. It's not only us presenting it, it's also a major part to exchange ideas and get also your additional feedback. So many of you were involved throughout the recent months in this study and joining our workshops or hosting workshops with our project team, having discussions, having interviews, and filling out the survey which we provided. So we already collected a lot of feedback, but we want to make sure that we have the broad view and the whole understanding of the inputs of the aviation community in Europe on this subject. So there will be a session of Q&A and discussion after the presentation. So you may, if you have some questions which arise throughout the presentation, there is the Q&A section of this webinar where you can enter your question in an anonymous way. I have my colleague here, let's say, monitoring the questions which came in, and we will pick them up as far as we can after the presentation, and we'll have roughly, I think, maximum 1 hour, 45 minutes of discussion after the presentation, and we will address these questions as far as we can. If you won't be able to answer all questions in the entire manner, we will provide the answers to the audience after this webinar in a written way, via email to the community, which for those who are registered for this webinar. If there are additional ideas or anything that comes to your mind which you find it's worth to note for this subject, you may also write a message after the webinar to the known email address which you also use to register for this webinar, tripple1airside.de. Where you're more than welcome to get in touch with the project team after the session. One note to EASA in this session. So EASA will participate in this webinar. So they are registered and observing or monitoring this session. The project team here, which presenting the interim results, is not part of EASA. So we are commissioned by EASA. And if there are any questions addressed to EASA, we might not be able to speak on behalf of EASA. So this is something what has to be on or via other channels. Okay, some more notes about the housekeeping and some information on the session. First of all, more importantly, this webinar will be recorded. So this means it will be available afterwards will be published, how you can access the record and the slide decks. So there's no need to take any snapshots or screenshots during the session. So you will get all this information what we show and discuss here today afterwards. Questions may be asked in the chat and will be answered at the end of the session. I already noticed it. And there will be some polls during the presentation where we just try to collect some input and feedback from the crowd for some, let's say, more or less easy questions. And as I presented already the project team, and it's hardly possible to present all 220 participants of today's session, we will have some first polls to open up the session. And my colleagues will publish it now, and there will be a poll button, I think, in the top bar of the session, where we have the first question, just to get an idea from which areas all the participants are. The first question would be, which country are you from? And just type in the name of the country, and we see live all the, let's say, countries which are typed in. Just give it a few seconds. So very interesting to see that we see many countries from Europe. Apparently Germany is well ahead on this section here. There's the answer, but we also have participants outside of the EASA countries and also outside of Europe, which is very interesting and also shows that this topic is also relevant in countries outside of EASA. Okay, we have now more than 130 answers. I think now it stops a bit. I would close this poll. So very interesting to see Germany, Italy, let's say most typed in countries here, but also Spain, Portugal, Iceland, Greece, Ireland, France, Belgium, Czech Republic, Albania, but also in between, I saw some countries outside of Europe, Trinidad, and some others. I don't really know where they are. So very interesting to see. Thank you for this. So we have quite a good idea. And to continue with a second question, also very interesting to see from which areas of the aviation domain you are from. So which group are you representing? Airport operators, ANSP, pilots, airlines or pilot representations, civil aviation authorities or similar organizations or any other organization. So already started. Okay, pretty interesting to see. So current state is about 60% airport representing airport operators, certainly highly relevant group in this context. ANSP 11%, 2% pilots and airline representations, 21%. So it's the second biggest group of civil aviation authorities and also some other organizations joining in. So it clearly shows that the interest in the field of airports and airport operators is quite high on the subject, and certainly interesting to see and to get the views of those participants here. So thank you very much. So this was the easy one, I can promise you. So there will be more tough questions throughout the session later on. And would close this poll now and can continue on with the next steps. So one note, there will be a break. We plan roughly to make this break after 90 minutes. So that we have a little bio break and grab a coffee, joining the restrooms and press through, and then we continue on with the last steps in the presentation and the discussion of the session. Good. So what to expect? So I think you all received an invitation, an overview of topics which we would like to tackle throughout today's session. So this is the overview of the agenda for today. There will be one section at the beginning introducing the topic of Tripple One, the background, the study, and the discussion around runway incursions at the beginning. Continued by a little overview of the analysis we did on runway incursion occurrences from those data we provided with. We will present you the current situation at European airports, which represent actually the results of our stakeholder involvement process throughout the interviews, survey, and the workshops, and to give you an overview what is the situation and airports in the EASA scope. We will have one section where process airports present their approach and their path and experience they did some years ago when implementing the Tripple One concept at process airport, which might be of interest for some of you. And we will have some words on the ongoing process of the analysis of benefits and risk in this regard, which will be then more representing the outlooking part for the next couple of months and the work we have ahead. And at the very end of the session, we will have a discussion and Q&A, and picking up your questions, and they always have the opportunity to speak up if we can manage this, and so that you can switch on your mic and bring in some comments or input. Okay, so for the first section, for the introduction, we'll hand over to my colleague Jayab, and so he will guide you through the first information.
Good morning, everybody, and also from my side, welcome to today's webinar on the research study on the Tripple One concept. Very warm greetings. I'm very happy to see such big number of participants, which shows that everybody is interested in enhancing runway safety and that runway safety is a priority for every aviation stakeholder. And basically, for the introduction, we would like to kick off today's webinar with a couple of theses. These theses represent topics that we will discuss in today's webinar. Therefore, I will just present them to you, but not comment them in the introduction. And let's start with the first one. Tripple One can act as a preventive barrier or a corrective barrier. However, for certain runway incursions, it does not have a perceived safety benefit. Second, the discussion on the suitability of Tripple One is negatively affected by the current language proficiency requirements. Third, the European aerodrome community needs a how-to ECAS. Number 4, out of all runway incursions with known origin listed in ECAS from 2005 to 2019, 26.5% are caused by vehicle or equipment. And last but not least, other safety nets might have a more significant impact on runway incursions. So we hope that maybe one or two or maybe all 5 theses have raised your attention and ignited your curiosity for this webinar, as we will discuss them later on in today's session. On the 27th of April 2021, the crew of a Boeing 737-400 being operated by ASL Airlines, Belgium, on a scheduled international cargo flight from Porto to Liège, saw a vehicle on the runway ahead during their night takeoff in good visibility. So what happened? 2 minutes after the Boeing 737-400 had called on tower frequency for its clearance at the gate, the tower controller had received a call from a follow-me vehicle on a separate radio channel used for such communication for permission to carry out a routine runway inspection. This was approved, and about a minute later, the vehicle entered the runway at taxiway Bravo, which you can see over here. The vehicle driver began its inspection by heading north in the center line of runway 35, so in this direction. While this runway inspection was in progress for 10 minutes, the 737-400 received taxi clearance to hold short of runway 35 at taxiway Bravo as well. This clearance was immediately modified on crew request to hold at taxiway Delta instead, which you can see here. After a very short taxi distance and a minute later, the flight crew reported ready for takeoff on taxiway Delta and was cleared. So now the figure here is mirrored a little bit, and I will continue to explain what has happened. At the time the clearance was given, the inspection vehicle had reached out the end of runway 35 and was executing a U-turn in order to inspect the rest of the runway, heading into the other direction. The 737 entered the runway and began its takeoff roll unaware of the vehicle. After about 15 seconds of the 737's takeoff run, the vehicle driver saw bright lights ahead on the runway, contacted the tower controller via trunk radio and asked whether there is an aircraft lining up. And after further 10 seconds, received the response from the controller, which was that the aircraft was taking off and the driver should try to vacate to the left. After a brief pause, the driver responded that he was already off the edge of the runway. Soon after this, the aircraft became airborne before reaching the vehicle. The crew subsequently reported having observed the vehicle at a late stage and decided that a continued takeoff would get them airborne before reaching it and was preferable instead of conducting a high-speed rejected takeoff. So this was a presentation of a runway incursion incident in which a vehicle driver is involved. And when it comes to accidents and incidents, often you will have more than just one cause that led to an incident. And it was also in this case that we had multiple factors that led to the runway incursion, so-called contributing factors. We are going to show you just some of them. There was unfortunately an inactive runway incursion monitoring and conflict alerting system, namely RIMCAS. Secondly, an obsolete memory add system of the controller, ineffective and totally dependent on human action to prevent spontaneous use of the runway by vehicles and aircraft. Deficiencies in the safety management system of the air navigation service provider, especially when it comes to just culture. So some of the safety deficiencies that were already known were not presented, discussed, and analyzed in the safety review board. Air traffic services were provided at this day for tower and approach positions by just a single controller without any supervision, working in continuous duty for a long period of time and in a low activity environment. Non-compliances with the requirements of Part ATS were not identified by the regulator. And in total, there was failure to oversee and detect operational and safety shortcomings of several air traffic units. When it comes to training, all the vehicles, all the follow-me vehicles at the airport were equipped with a so-called radio scanner. However, and unfortunately, the vehicle drivers were not trained to properly use them. And last but not least, the investigation report stated that the lack of a single frequency for all aircraft and vehicle movements in the maneuvering area led to decreased situational awareness. That having been said, in the history of aviation, always incidents and accidents led to the development of new technologies and also regulative amendments. Further, best practices and guidelines were developed. So when it comes to runway incursions, especially the runway incursion in Linate of 2001, in which 2 aircraft actually were involved, led to many different developments. One of them on the international basis is the Manual on the Prevention of Runway Incursions, ICAO Doc 9870, in which different recommendations are stipulated, and also guidance on, for example, how to define, analyze, and establish hotspots at the airport. Of course, there is also a European counterpart, which is represented in the European Action Plan for the Prevention of Runway Incursions, namely EAPRI, in which many and hundreds of recommendations are included for the different aviation stakeholders, like, for example, aerodrome operators, pilots, air traffic controllers, and airport planners. And let me submit to your consideration at this point that a global action plan for the prevention of runway incursions is about to be released in a couple of weeks, which includes updated recommendations on the prevention of runway incursions. But maybe let's take a step back and ask ourselves, what is a runway incursion? And a definition for runway incursion can be found in PANS ATM, ICAO Doc 4444, in which it says any occurrence at an aerodrome involving the incorrect presence of an aircraft, vehicle, or person on the protected area of the surface designated for the landing and takeoff of aircraft. And one may ask, what is an incorrect presence? So we have a term in this definition that actually needs a further definition. And this actually was a term that was used, was discussed in the Tripple One study with many different aerodrome stakeholders. And at this point, we would like to involve you and ask you, in your opinion, what is an incorrect presence in case of runway incursion? Is it A, the failure of a pilot or vehicle driver to comply with a valid ATC clearance? Or is it B, the compliance of a pilot or vehicle driver with an incorrect ATC clearance? Or C, maybe both answers, A and B. So maybe take some seconds to think about these questions and to give us your feedback via the poll. Okay, so we have reached roughly or more than 120 answers, which is phenomenal. And as far as I can see, 85% have the opinion that it is both, and 15% say no, it's just the failure of a pilot or vehicle driver to comply with a valid ATC clearance, which is very interesting because during the stakeholder workshops that we have conducted, they are actually aerodrome operators that only count runway incursion occurrences as runway incursions in which the pilot or the vehicle driver did not comply with a valid ATC clearance. For us in the study, we definitely agree with the 85%, and we considered both. So on the one hand, the failure of a pilot or vehicle driver to comply with a valid ATC clearance, as well as compliance of a pilot or vehicle driver with an incorrect ATC clearance. So firstly, during the occurrences that we analyzed, we saw a big number of occurrences that also cover the second part. And secondly, we regard also the second part as safety critical on the runway, and that is the reason why it was required to also consider those cases. You can see here potential scenarios in which that would qualify for one runway incursion, which are landing without ATC clearance, takeoff without ATC clearance, incorrect entry of an aircraft or vehicle on the runway or its protected area, a very common case. Incorrect runway crossings by an aircraft or vehicle. So runway crossings is also a very critical topic that was discussed with the community. And last but not least, incorrect spacing between successive arriving and departing, or departing and arriving aircraft. We can see that all those scenarios involve three main stakeholders, which are the aircraft operator, so the pilots, the air traffic controller, as well as the vehicle driver. And it is quite obvious that good communication is key to reduce the risk of runway incursion. And when it comes to communication, the EATRI lists a number of recommendations in order to enhance communication and enable a better situational awareness. And the situational awareness is intended to be enhanced, especially as mentioned before, for pilots, air traffic controllers, as well as vehicle drivers. I would like to highlight three recommendations made in the EAPRI, which are 1.3.3, implement, monitor, and ensure the use of the readback procedure. 1.3.4, where practicable, improve situational awareness by conducting all communications associated with runway operations using aviation English. And 1.3.5, when practicable, improve situational awareness by implementing procedures whereby all communications associated with runway operations are on a common or cross-coupled frequency. Why are those three recommendations highlighted? I hope everyone already knows the answer. The reason is that those represent the basis for the Triple One concept. And the Triple One concept is actually derived from those three recommendations, which is one runway, one frequency, one language, to have the communication for runway operation on a single frequency between all stakeholders in one language, and this language should be English. So after having maybe recalled the concept of Triple One, I would like to take a step back and to bring again the runway incursion incident that we have discussed in this group earlier to the table and ask you the second poll question. Imagine the case that Triple One was implemented at this airport during the incident. Is Triple One, in this case, a safety barrier that would have prevented the runway incursion from occurring? Or would Triple One have reduced the severity of the runway incursion outcome? Or C, is it both? Or D, none of the above? So maybe take a minute to think about it and try to answer the question in order to be able to discuss this afterwards. 'I will again wait a little bit until we reach more than 120 answers. $120. So thank you very much. We have a third that has the opinion that it would have just acted as a preventive safety barrier. 9% say it is just a corrective barrier, and 50% have the opinion that it is both. So what is a preventive safety barrier? This can be explained best with the Swiss cheese model. And in this case, imagine that Tripple One is just an additional safety or a cheese layer, which is included in the system, preventing the occurrence from happening. Corrective safety barrier. If it is a corrective safety barrier, then the top event has already happened, which is in this case the runway incursion. And we have additional safety mitigations that would either reduce a consequence from happening or reduce the severity of the consequence. And talking about severity consequences of runway incursions, I would like to draw your attention to the ICAO Doc Manual 9870, which I have highlighted earlier, because this one includes different severity categories for the runway incursions, represented in the categories from A to D. So again, coming back to our runway incursion incident, if Tripple One was implemented at that day, the vehicle driver would have heard the clearance to the pilot because the communication would have been on the same frequency. So maybe in this case, he would be able to prevent the occurrence from happening by calling the ATC or by any other immediate action. So yes, it could have been a preventive barrier. If the pilot has already accessed the runway and been cleared, for example, to take off, also the vehicle driver would have heard the clearance and would have been able to react and could, for example, leave the runway earlier, because when it comes to the incident, the distance between the aircraft and the vehicle driver was just 300 meters. So maybe this distance could have been reduced if Tripple One was in place. So yes, I agree with the 51%. Tripple One in this case could have been a preventive or a corrective barrier. I would like to just show you another runway incursion incident that has happened. Driver missed to stop before runway. The driver of a snow removal vehicle received clearance on taxiways and should stop before the runway. The driver drove the cleared way but did not stop before the runway, crossed it and stopped before the next runway. No traffic was on the runway. Again, here I would love to involve you and ask you again, for this incident, was Tripple One, if Tripple One was implemented at that day, would it have been a preventive barrier, a corrective safety barrier, both, or none of them? So maybe take again a minute to think about it and to give us an answer. $76, $80 answers. 90. I will just wait until we have reached more than 100 answers. 100. So 55% of today's participants have the perception that it would not have been able to mitigate this runway incursion. And we agreed to this opinion and would like to bring or to emphasize the first thesis that we presented earlier, which is that yes, safety Tripple One can act as a preventive barrier in some cases, a corrective barrier, and there are unfortunately also runway incursions that where Tripple One would not have an impact, a perceived safety impact. And this is especially highlighted when we have issues of disorientation of the vehicle driver, yeah, like it is in this case. So you can see Tripple One definitely has the capability, let's say, to enhance runway safety, and therefore EASA commissioned us to conduct this research study and as a kind of impact assessment. And this study can be subdivided more or less in 4 phases. The first phase that we have already finalized is a regulatory assessment in which we assess the current states of application, either on member state level or also on the aerodrome level. So we wanted to see, are there already airports that have implemented Tripple One, or are there any provisions stipulated in the EASA member states that require to implement either Tripple One or variations of it? And secondly, we also did a regulatory review in which we firstly identified the main pillars, or let's say regulative elements that directly implement Tripple One. And these elements are, on the one hand, language, radio procedures, operation of vehicles on the maneuvering area, as well as competencies. So for these 4 elements, we assessed as to whether ICAO or EASA have already defined requirements that would directly implement Tripple One or not. And this study resulted in a gap analysis in which we scrutinized as to whether the EAPRI recommendations related to those 4 pillars were already implemented by the EASA regulation or not. And we could see that, for example, for parts of these elements, some requirements have already been transverted into requirements, into also mandatory requirements, which is, for example, the case for language. Here we can see that the EAPRI recommendation to conduct the runway-related communication in English is partially manifested, for example, in the language requirement of ADR B 029, as well as ZERA 15015. However, there are also some requirements that have not been implemented yet, which is, for example, related to operation of vehicles on the maneuvering area. There is a recommendation of EASA or EAPRI, to record and track vehicles entering the maneuvering area through the use of vehicle progress strip. So this has not been manifested in any legal requirements. Second part of the study is an occurrence analysis. So I have already mentioned that we assessed multiple runway incursions. So we've been provided with access of entries in the ECAS database, which we analyzed in order to subdivide or in order to derive the main contributing factors that lead to runway incursions that are relevant for the Triple One concept. But we will let you know more information to the occurrence analysis in a couple of minutes. Then next phase was actually the conduction of multiple stakeholder workshops across Europe, because we wanted and we were required to discuss this concept with the different aerodrome operators, because there are different levels and opinions on the concept. And all the information that we got should lead to a detailed analysis of the safety benefits and safety risks of Triple One. So I can tell you that we have already concluded a big part of the stakeholder workshops. Of course, no one should hesitate to contact us after this webinar if there is anyone interested in doing such an on-site workshop or just an interview, because we are always curious to get more information and opinion on the Triple One concept, which is maybe dedicated to the specific location across Europe. As far as the analysis regarding benefits and risks is concerned, we already started with this, but this will be the main part of next year, in which we also will hopefully finalize the study, the research study, by making policy recommendations to EASA and also make recommendations on how and if any parts of Triple One should be implemented in the EASA regulatory framework. Last but not least, I just would like to highlight that we are not doing this project on our own. So we are supported by Brussels Airport, which is actually the first airport in Europe that has implemented Triple One back in 2004. So they could give us many information based on implementation risks, challenges, and how they overcome challenges. Further, we have also a big group of additional experts in the team that help us to give sometimes also independent opinion, for example, by pilots or air traffic controllers on the concept and how and if it should be implemented. And last but not least, and maybe this is the most important for this study, is the discussion with you. With the 220 participants and more that are listening today and that are interacting with us, discussing the concept, potential variations of it, challenges, and maybe also opportunities, we have, as mentioned before, started with this process and of course are looking forward to getting more insights from you. So do not hesitate to contact us after this webinar. We would continue with the second part, which is the occurrence analysis. And I would give back the word to my colleague.
So thank you very much. I hope you're enjoying so far. The very valuable and insightful information Chair provided us on setting the grounds for understanding the context of runway incursions, where the Triple One concept comes from, and what the intentions are. And now we are curious to hear and to see what the occurrence analysis of the incursion data, which was provided to Airside, to the project team, resulted in. And therefore, I hand over to Rainer, who's joining online, and Caroline, who is here in the webinar room.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Rainer, and I will start with the occurrence analysis. And first of all, we defined some goals which we would derive from the occurrence analysis. And the first one is to identify the origin of the runway incursion. So are the most runway incursions caused by vehicles or by aircraft? So there was some thesis in the beginning, so we will also answer this one and have a closer look on it. And the second one is to identify the contributing factors, so which are human factors, but not only, there are also some other factors. We will also have a closer look on this one later on. And at the end, we want to know how big is the problem of a runway incursion caused by a vehicle. And so to answer these goals, we use different sources. The first source is the ECARES database. It's a European occurrence reporting platform by EASA, where it's required to report all runway incursions to it. So it's a mandatory reporting. And unfortunately, not all runway incursions are within the ECARES system. So even for those which have been analyzed by investigation authorities, some of them are not listed in the ECARES database. The second source is the EWARE database, which is a voluntary reporting system operated by Eurocontrol to collect information from different stakeholders. So it contains only voluntary runway incursion reports. And the last one are the official investigation reports by the investigation authorities, which are, of course, only for accidents and serious incidents. And there are not so many accidents, serious incidents due to runway incursion. So as we analyzed this ECARES data, we found also some issues, or we have struggled with the data as there are some issues with the data. And the first issue is the coding of a runway incursion. So there is different ways how runway incursions are coded. There's an ECARES coding guide, which recommends to use the occurrence category field for high-level grouping. There's only one entry, which is named runway incursion, vehicle, aircraft, or person. And for details, the event type should be used. So there are different event types. And for vehicle caused runway incursions, there's the event type runway incursion by vehicle equipment. And the second issue is about the narrative. The narrative is used by the authorities, which summarize the reporter descriptions and should also include the result of investigations. And so what you found are for some reports only very short narrative. So the highest bar on or the first two bars, which are less than 100 words in the narrative, are quite common for many reports. So it's difficult to analyze these data and derive contributing factors from this one. And the next issue is about the investigation results. Only few occurrences contain investigation results as a narrative. And even if it's recommended by the ECARES coding guide. And the last one is about identifying the same occurrences. As in ECARES, many stakeholders can report: pilot, ANSP, airport, and the authorities should summarize these occurrences to one, with a so-called file number, so they can be identified as one occurrence. And unfortunately, there are also some entries which have different file numbers for the same occurrence. So I would like to start in poll. So what is your, oh, sorry, there's one thesis about, so the community would need some guidelines of how to eCast. So coming to the poll, so what is your experience with using eCast?
All right. Thank you, Rainer. I guess I will take over at this point. And yeah, when I look at the results or your feedback on the question, I can see that roughly 32%, so about a third of everybody being in this webinar has no experience in using eCares, and yeah, all the other answers are more or less evenly distributed. So some people submitted a report, some edited it, some just saw someone else using it. Some were trained, so now I don't know if those people who were trained to use it also have more experience, and others actually evaluated eCares data, which is also very interesting, and which is actually the one I chose. Okay, I would like to continue on the two questions of what are the main origins of runway incursions and what are the contributing factors. And as we've said in the beginning, we used 3 sources to answer those questions. And for the next couple slides, I would like to focus on the eCares data, which is like the most comprehensive data set we got. We had we requested eCares data to analyze or to be analyzed after or throughout the project. And so we requested it to hopefully capture all the runway incursions that happened and that are available in eCares. And that led to a data set we received from EASA that contained about 220,000 entries. So that's a lot of data. But those 220,000 entries, as we've said, there may be several people submitting a report, for example. Those 220,000 entries correspond to about 23,400 occurrences, and every file number, as we've said, based on the coding guidance, every file number contained in the data set was only counted once, and that also applies to all the different filtering stages I will present in the following. So, as I said, 23,400 occurrences were provided in the beginning, and from there we took a few steps to filter that data and to reduce it to the relevant data, and also to reduce it to data that we are able to analyze, let's say by hand, read it in detail, because 220,000 entries are a little bit too much to go into in detail. Okay, so we have those 23,400 entries, and those were reduced to roughly 12,000 occurrences. And to get that number, we reduced the time frame, we received data from the year 2000 up to and including 2022. We reduced that to like a 15-year period from 2005 up to and including 2019. We also, since it's required to report all the occurrences involving aircraft registered and or operated by an organization that is established in a member state, the data may also contain or also contains occurrences that happened outside the EU. So of course we reduced that data set to only those occurrences that happened inside the EU and also that happened at aerodromes that are covered by the regulation 2018-1139. And that led to those 12,000 occurrences we can see here. So those 12,000 entries, or not entries, those 12,000 occurrences still contained occurrences that actually were not runway incursions, since we filtered on the one hand the event type and on the other hand the occurrence category, which probably only means something to part of you, since some people do not have any experience with ECAS, which is like how I felt like, I don't know, a year ago before we started analyzing the data. And for the event type, for example, there's one category where you can choose just incursion. So that may also include taxiway incursions, for example. So those 12,000 entries we reduced on the one hand to only runway incursions, but also runway incursions with known origin, because there were also some runway incursions involved that had an unknown origin, and we reduced it to 7,800 runway incursions where a dedicated origin was given. And when we look at the thesis we saw in the beginning, we said, okay, 26.5% are caused by vehicle or equipment. And maybe let's have a look at the distribution over all of the four categories we pointed out at this point. So we have the runway incursion by aircraft, which is by far the biggest segment, close to 70%. Then those 26.5% are runway incursions by vehicle or equipment. Another 4.7% are runway incursions by person. And then we have like a very small amount of runway incursions by others. Okay, so we said for those 7,800 occurrences, we have a known origin. And for the next step, I will focus on those incursions that are by vehicle and equipment or runway incursions by persons. And that leaves roughly 2,400 occurrences. And those occurrences, again, were filtered because we wanted to have a better idea, or we wanted to have the opportunity to actually go into detail into the contributing factors. So we have seen, okay, the origin of the runway incursions, and the second step was to identify contributing factors. And we focus on those ones that were by persons or by vehicles/equipment. And as I said, those were again filtered to identify those runway incursions that have a more comprehensive narrative, or where we assumed the narrative of the ECAS entry to be a little more comprehensive, which means we filtered for words that indicated that there was a little more information on an investigation that was conducted after the event. So we applied that filter onto those 2,400 occurrences, and we got 455 occurrences that had narratives that indicated, okay, there may be more information. So we started actually reading through those 455 events, and we found out that 264 out of those events that we read in detail actually pointed out some kind of contributing factor. And we identified on the one hand human factors that are shown on the bottom of that graph. And we also identified some other factors. And so when it comes to the human factors, lack of communication is actually the major one that we identified so far. And lack of communication may be something like a misunderstanding, or also like missing communication in that case. Lack of awareness may be something like situational awareness. Lack of knowledge refers to like missing information, that someone just did not have a certain information, but also missing training or lack of training. And the fourth one that we want to point out, there were a few more, but we are only showing the ones with like the main contributions, was distraction. When we look at the other three factors, there was the radio telephony equipment that was either not functioning how it was intended to, or it was actually just missing. And in some cases, it's also or maybe a question of misusage of the provided equipment. Then there is that bar that indicates the ATC errors, which is basically the incorrect ATC clearance we've heard in the definition of a runway incursion earlier. And we've also seen that lack of procedures actually contributed to runway incursions in 8%, roughly 8%. So, of course, the question is whether those contributing factors may be improved or affected by the implementation of Tripple One. And that is still something we're actually discussing. Some of the factors may be improved more than others by having Tripple One implemented. And that's something we're still going to look at over the next weeks and months. And we hope to give you a more clear answer towards a later stage throughout the study. But it's also not 100% clear if it's actually going to be possible, since it's very hard to actually make a clear relation between the contributing factors and the elements of Tripple One. All right, that is a first insight of, or a summarized insight of what we've done, especially with the ECAS data. There's some reports in there that were actually not in ECARES, but that were captured through those were captured because we've looked at accidents and serious incidents that were investigated by the investigation authorities. And with that, I will hand back to Jan. Thank you very much. And we'll continue with the next topic.
Yeah, thank you, Rainer and Caroline, for this interesting insights on the occurrence analysis. Very interesting to see the challenges when it comes to using the safety data which is available to actually allow such analysis, which actually represents the proactive part of discussing and considering additional safety mitigation measures. So actually a real challenge to make use or make best use of this data and to understand whether or not Tripple One would have an impact on those occurrences or not. Actually, as the introductory part already mentioned, a major pillar of this study is the analysis of the current situation at European airports on the one side, and on the other side also to discuss these subjects and the Tripple One topic with the aviation community and all affected stakeholders who would be affected by Tripple One and these elements of Tripple One. So this is what I'm going to take you through in the next couple of minutes on the insights we gained on the analysis of the current situation at European airports. Actually, our task and objective here was the determination of the current situation at aerodromes in Europe regarding the implementation or non-implementation of the Tripple One concept. And which means that the first step actually to identify what concepts are out there. And I think it's not a secret that there are various concepts how vehicle communication especially is managed and arranged at every specific airport. So there is no unique database available, listing all airports in Europe and in EASA scope, and saying this is the concept they're using in terms of what language is used, what frequency setup is used. So this was the first step to really get an idea and to identify what concepts are out there or what are the characteristics of each concept. And also by doing so to see if there are any scheme or any trends what we can see when looking at characteristics of specific airports, whether it's a big airport, a small airport, a complex runway layout, what type of operations they do. Are there some trends to see, okay, say big airport, high level, high density of traffic, is more a tendency towards having all communications on English on the runway, or is there any other trends what we can see? On the other side, it's also interesting to see and to discuss the Triple One idea and concept was introduced in the beginning of this webinar. But as we will see also in the upcoming minutes, it is not a black and white. So there are certain elements of Triple One when it comes to the frequency setup and also to the language requirements, which can, let's say, be considered as a variation of the, let's say, definition or concept of Triple One. In the second phase, or a second part of this stakeholder engagement process was also to understand why actually those concepts are like they are. So there are certainly historical heritages at certain airports of their concepts they use, but there is certainly actually a good reason why it is done like it is done, considering all the locally specific type of operations, layouts, and staffing situation, and so on. And what are challenges or also constraints when it comes to the decision or the discussion whether or not to implement Triple One? So we understand the idea, and I think the benefits are somehow obvious when it comes to combining the frequency, bringing all users on a runway environment to a common frequency and a common language. But actually, what could be additional constraints which we did not identify so far, which could restrict or which could hinder an airport operator to go in this direction. What we also did as preparation for the next steps of the analysis, also to discuss with the airport operators and pilots, ANSP representatives, what benefits and hazards and risk Triple One brings. I think here mainly also focused if there are challenges, if there are constraints, you implement a new procedure and a new way of operations, you always have to think what additional risks maybe also in other areas could be associated to the implementation of such a new concept. How did it? So we did basically 3 steps, or it is structured through 3 layers of the stakeholder consultation process. So the first layer was to get the base understanding by using a survey. So many of you and at this place, thank you very much for filling out for those airport operators who did this survey to get the base understanding of how language, how frequency setup is organized at, let's say, a broader frame all across Europe. We set up this survey, was distributed through various organizations and representatives, namely ACA Europe, the German Regional Airport Association, the European Airport Association, and those aerodrome focal points, what we already know and get in contact with or contacted us also. So there we could reach actually a big audience of those or who are willing to provide the information on this survey. So we will see some results out of this survey in a couple of minutes. The next steps, and actually what we realized that we have, let's say, a broad variety of different concepts. I think at some point you could say as many concepts as airports in the European aviation world. Which led us actually also to the point where we need to discuss and analyze a bit more detail how these concepts work and what is the rationale behind. So just by putting the question, what frequency you have, what frequencies you use for vehicle communication, how do you issue clearances, and what language requirements you use is not enough to really understand the variety of concepts. So that's why we did some interviews and workshops to further or to discuss in further detail the situation at those specific airports and to identify actually those aspects I initially stated in this session. So, bit exciting months of this year, visiting numerous airports, and especially for the workshop sessions, where we always try to get, let's say, all stakeholders, local stakeholders of the airports together. Some airports arranged it to use the local runway safety team committee, where you typically have all relevant representatives from the aerodrome departments, training departments, tower units, and the main users, base captains, airline representatives, where it is required, those from ground handling and rescue firefighting service all together, and to discuss and go through the individual concepts and what are the reasons, constraints, challenges, risks associated with the Tripple One concept. So I can say that for all us project managers, it was a very exciting journey and very interesting conversations. And even though we made quite a couple of workshops, even though the last workshops where you always think you always heard all of the different aspects of the concepts, there was always some new insights with every workshop which we could gain. So the online survey, to begin with this, we received numerous answers and responses to our online survey. So we actually summarized it up to 69 airports, airport operators or organizations. So some fulfill this representing more than one airport. So you have airport operators, of course, operating more than one airport in Europe, where sometimes it was one response associated to the whole network. And some network operators or airports belonging to a network made individual answers. Here at the chart, you get an impression overview from which areas in Europe and which airports in Europe we got responses. And actually, it's good to see that we could achieve a quite well coverage on the map in Europe and also beyond the EASA scope. So we got also responses from the UK and those European countries not, let's say, member of the EASA. So actually interesting enough to see. So for us, it was important to get good representation by this survey and to get a good coverage, especially considering two main aspects. The one aspect was we look at the EASA airports, which means all aerodromes which have to be certified, let's say, under the regulations of the European regulations. And here we could actually achieve a quite well distribution. So we took here the traffic density as a parameter to evaluate. Of course, we want not only cover the big hub airports, which definitely have different challenges and different operational contexts as, let's say, small regional airports, which have a completely different environment and different operations and also different hazards, risk and benefits maybe of this system. So we can see here light airports 1/3, a slightly more heavy density airports participated, but I think overall we can see three, let's say, almost equally distributed pieces of this cake here. And so this is actually what showed us a well coverage. And if you look at the European distribution, which countries the responses came from, and also looking at the traffic density, of course, it's not equally in every country, because in some countries you have more airports than in other countries. But we see here, get an impression from which countries we received responses without naming, let's say, all individual airports here, but you can get an impression where we got feedback from. So interesting was to see actually what is now the situation regarding the Triple One pillars, namely the, let's say, setup of the frequency, how vehicles communicate on a one-way environment, and what language do they use. So you can see here that we have two options which we looked at. So the first option was vehicles use actually the same channel as the tower uses for the communication with the aircraft, so with the actually tower frequency for this particular runway. And the other option was that they use a completely different channel, trunk radio, dedicated VHF frequency, or whatever the local solution was there. You can see here that it's, let's say, roughly 50-50 percentage of both options, common channel, separate channel. You can see here when it comes to language, because it's good to be on the same frequency or on the same channel, but it would be also nice that also you can understand, let's say, what the other party says. And this is in most cases limited if it's only used in national language of this particular country. And we see here a clear tendency that 69% of all the answers was stated that there was only a national language used on this vehicle frequency, irrespectively if it was used on a common channel or on a separate channel. And we see that there are some airports where there is a mix between English and national language on this frequency, and we see that 12% of all responses used English as the used language on this frequency. So we looked a bit and looked at the data and the responses, and it was, I think, for us also interesting to see the huge variety of different concepts. And we looked at different characteristics of the aerodromes. I already mentioned the traffic density and also the, let's say, predominantly type of traffic, whether it's a more commercially orientated airport, if it's a more IFR sharing, because then we look also on what type of air traffic actually uses this airport, if it's more dominantly general aviation using an airport, or is it more commercial and or IFR traffic. We looked at the runway complexity, so different categories. It's certainly a difference if it's a single runway airport, if it's an airport with parallel runway system, dependent, independent, or if it's a crossed runway system. So what we saw actually in terms of frequency and language is that we cannot really see any tendency when it comes to traffic density. So you see airports using English, using the same frequency at some small airports with low traffic volumes, but also on airports with higher traffic volumes. So there's no big tendency what we could see. We can see a slight tendency is when it comes to the traffic share. Interestingly, that if you have a high share of commercial or IFR traffic, there is a tendency to use, or that concepts more use vehicles being on a tower or on cross-coupled frequency. No relation to runway complexity, and again with the runway dependency, it is a slight trend visible that the more runways are dependent, the more there is a tendency to have vehicles on a common frequency. So, but actually looking at the data on the, let's say, percentages in detail, there's not really a tendency or a connection between the different characteristics and the use of the one or the other concept visible. So it's a very, very heterogeneous environment and use of the local procedures. So from those 69 airports, what we received response, which who participated in the survey, and thank you again for participating. 33 airports have a common air tower frequency for pilots and vehicle drivers, as it published in the AAP, or via cross-coupled frequency. So they are on the same channel, and only 8 out of them require the use of English for the communication for vehicle drivers. And here the partially in brackets, what we see later on, that there are concepts where you have some drivers on English and some drivers not using English. So when we look at the different 8 airports where we consider them that Triple One or a close variation of Triple One is implemented, we see actually, and looking at the different parameters, and to see whether there's a tendency or not, we see that actually we find completely different airports in terms of traffic density, traffic share, runway complexity, and runway dependency. So there is actually not the one airport with this dedicated runway or operational characteristics who dominantly implement Triple One or not. So it does not appear that a specific set of characteristics really influence the decision of pro or contra Triple One implementation. Good. So maybe it's a good time to ask you, actually, especially those of you who, let's say, represent an airport operator. Did you evaluate the implementation of a common frequency and English for vehicles on active runways? And here we have 4 different answers, and maybe it's good that only those of you who represent an airport operator answer this question. Yes, we considered the implementation of common frequency and English, but not in detail. Yes, we considered this and made, let's say, deeper evaluation, for example, through a safety assessment. No, or no, but we are planning to evaluate it. All right, we're approaching 100 answers. Interesting to see a relatively equal share. So we have a couple of airports who already made detailed assessments. One of these answers is mine, so we have to count out one of them. And we have almost 30% or 60% if you count it together, or 70% who never did any detailed or any evaluation of implementing Triple One at their airports, which is very interesting to see. Okay, thank you very much. I would close this question for the moment. And actually, before we go into a short break, some words on the more detailed conversations we did during interviews and workshops. So we sorry for that. So actually, we did some more detailed discussions with a selection of those airports, which actually was subject to, okay, we have to see that we get a good share of heavy, medium, or light airports. We have looked, of course, at different regions of the EASA scope to see that we get a good coverage here and to consider different, let's say, areas and which certainly also affect the language skills of the population, for example. So we've made 19 airport interviews and 13 workshops. So at some airports we did interviews and workshops, and for some airports we only did interviews. We not only ask airports and the local, let's say, stakeholder groups, but we did also, namely, 2, let's say, more generic workshops on to get the view and, let's say, an independent and, let's say, not only focus on one airport environment, to get the view of the controllers and pilots. So we did one ETCO workshop, which was supported by IFATCA, and one pilot workshop, which was supported and facilitated by the German Cockpit Association and the European Cockpit Association. And thank you also for those who participated and supported us here to get, let's say, also the insights not only for the airport operators, which certainly the group mostly affected, or where most of the action would be if it comes to the implementation of Tripple One, but also those, let's say, users of the communication, or the, let's say, those who would, let's say, feel or experience a change when also vehicle drivers would join the frequency. Interesting when we can look at the different type of concepts and maybe one little more explanation about the communication environment. So I think we all know who is communicating at an airport with whom, but it's interesting, or I think also important here to see what is the communication environment and who is talking to whom and who, let's say, or how situation awareness by communication is can be ensured. We have, of course, an airport environment, and we look here especially only at the runway environment because the objective of Tripple One is runway safety, runway operations, and this is why we look here at the runway surface itself and also the runway safety areas surrounding a runway. Of course, we have two-way communication with aircrew, with pilots departing and taking off, usually on a tower frequency, with an ETCO or one or more ETCOs, controlling, surveying, and giving clearances to aircraft. So usually or often you not only have one aircraft on this frequency, you have two aircraft. So you have a controller controlling and communicating to multiple aircraft, which also allow them to understand what's on the frequency. There's an aircraft in front of me, there's an aircraft taking off in front of me. So allowing them to build up their mental mindset and their understanding of the situation, what's going on, and also which can influence their behavior and their preparations for their next steps and next procedures they do. So it's a listening capability only, because usually if you look at especially IFR operations or controlled airports, there's no direct communication between one and the other pilot. It's more listening and enabling to understand, okay, there's another aircraft, this is the position. Here it's now a first point, actually, looking at the flying community. What's the language here at this channel? At most airports, of course, in IFR operations, commercial operations, English is the standard language which is being used. But there are certain environments where there are also other languages used on this control frequency, especially if you look at smaller airports with a high general aviation and VFR flight share, where you actually also allowed and also it's also practice to communicate in the national language of this country. So if I do a VFR flight as a private pilot to a controlled airport within Germany, for example, I could talk in German to the controller, which does maybe not allow the international non-German speaking pilot flying to this airport to understand what I'm saying in this frequency. Not only an issue on general aviation or those airports who have more general aviation, but it's also an issue on, let's say, an IFR operations or commercial operations where you have areas and also airports where the use of the national language is allowed as of what is written in the ARP. And out of the 69 airports in our survey, for example, there are only 15 airports who restrict their communication or the language on their ATS to English only. So at all other airports, it is also allowed to communicate in the national language and English. So now we do not only have aircraft operating in a runway environment, we also have a certain type of vehicle operations, ground vehicle operations, and of course they are also controlled, monitored, and surveyed by the tower, and they have also two-way communication to allow clearances, to give clearances and instruction and information to these vehicles. So now, if you have a complete separate frequency setup, we have no real link between vehicle ground operations and aircraft operations. Now you have some airports and some airport environments where vehicles, for example, have two devices on board, where they also allow to monitor and to listen to the tower frequency between the tower and the pilots, which allows them to understand, okay, this is what's going on the runway. I have a mental picture, aircraft coming in, aircraft coming out. So which actually also requires the vehicle driver to understand the language and the communication tower pilot, which is an interesting issue because we all know that let's say aviation frequencies and control frequencies, it's a different language or very specific language, phraseologies, and so which actually requires to put the drivers into a position to understand what is communicated on this frequency. And now it's also, and this is what was actually also discussed in the beginning of the session, how can pilots or also put in a position to understand what vehicle operations is on or close to the runway, and to also get this into the picture, because this is something what is usually only, so that the full picture is only with the controller. Having all vehicle and aircraft operations on the screen or out of the window. Of course, pilot assumes controller has this under control. He knows where the vehicle is, and once he gives me a clearance, he passes through some traffic information if required. So this is the mean actually how pilots can, let's say, be aware of the situation. Okay, when we look at what setups in terms of frequency and language did we find? Actually, we categorized it in 4 different frequency setups. So the first one, there's vehicles are on a same tower frequency as aircraft are. We have 2 completely different separate channels. So it's ground vehicles on a separate trunk frequency, not having a direct link to the communication between pilot and ATCO. Some airports, as said, there is listen capability from by the vehicle drivers who can listen to the tower frequency. And at some airports, you see also environments where you have a group of vehicle drivers who are on a common tower frequency and another group which are exclusively on a separate frequency. So for the cases 2, 3, and 4, you can, let's say, or you must always have a look how the procedures and how the arrangements are within the tower cabin. In the easiest case or in the simplest case, you have both groups, aircraft and vehicles, communicating through different channels, but they're communicating to one single ATCO position, which means there's one controller communicating, however it's technically organized, on one frequency to the aircraft and on another frequency to the ground vehicles on the national language. So he has to cope with 2 different channels and 2 different languages in most cases. Or this is, let's say, the other concept. What you can find is that you have the tower channel communicating to the ATCO, and you have the vehicles talking to another position in the tower, which is then most cases the assistant position. And the ATCO and the assistant or delivery or whoever cover this task then communicates and coordinates directly through elbow coordination with the ATCO in order to permit vehicles to enter the one-way environment or not. So an interesting part is the question about the language and the phraseology. And we try to capture, let's say, the different options within, let's say, a bar or a scale, how we want to call it, where you have, let's say, your vehicle drivers communicating on a language or the national language, which is in most cases the case. And then, say, the next step, or actually, in most cases, there's also phraseology behind, which is in the national language, but you have different phrases and coordinated phrases together with the ATC, how they coordinate. Some airports, you have a mix between English and national, and also then for both the national and the English part in the phraseology. You can say, okay, we do it in English. So requiring your drivers to learn English and or that they already can English. And then you have, let's say, 3 different possibilities, which we can cover as a sort of an aviation English. This is what was referred to in the APRI. You can say, okay, we reduce the set of required English to a basic set of phraseology, to not set, let's say, the requirements or the benchmark for drivers so high, because this is one of the main issues you will focus here or you will encounter. And we set this to a basic phraseology and a really functional English for those communications which are relevant for situational awareness of pilots of ground vehicle movements. And you can, of course, also think of, okay, we take these, let's say, language proficiency levels, which are already defined and on the European level, but also on the ICAO level. And we take, for example, the operational level 4 here, which allows you a fluent communication of non-standard situations and explain, let's say, more contextual information in English. So why we open this discussion? Of course, that's one of the major objections what most airports state who are, let's say, hesitating or deciding against the implementation of Tripple One is the language proficiency aspect. And here we, let's say, try to open the discussion what level of English is really required in order to fulfill the objective, enable situational awareness for all operators on the runway environment. Okay, I think at this stage we have a little poll, maybe, to involve you in this discussion. So in your opinion, what is the minimum language proficiency required to ensure an adequate situational awareness on runway operations? provided it is a common frequency, because we will not make up this discussion if there are two separate channels. So assume that there would be a common channel. What language proficiency level would you think is mostly adequate to fulfill this requirement? So just in national language with phraseology, just English without any further scheme, functional English with basic phraseology, aviation English with phraseology, so you can refer to ICAO phraseology requirements, but there are also some countries where you have national phraseologies or national certificates, radio certificates, like in Germany, for example, or English operational level 4. So as this is a very crucial and interesting question, I suppose that we take a little break and make your thoughts and let's say, as I see the numbers are quite high already, but I would suppose we make a break as we are allowed with 100 minutes roughly. And I suggest that we continue the session in about 10 minutes time as of now, which means then 11 o'clock and 55 Central European time. All right, it's 55, so we are back online and continue with the webinar workshop on the Tripple One concepts. Interesting to see the answers on the question, what minimum language proficiency would you deem as appropriate or adequate to ensure situational awareness on one-way operations. Interesting that we see more than 80%, 85% answering English and 15% or no, 13% answering national language with phraseology only. And also interesting to see that there is a majority tending to the use of ICAO phraseology over the English operational level 4 or a basic set of phrases as a limited or functional set of English. So thank you very much for this. So analyzing the established concepts and rationales behind it was also apparent that we have to discuss let's say the operational context of the airports and the operations which is specific for each airport and what happens on or close to the runway environment. And this is actually where we also came to the conclusion that we have to have a look on what operators, apart from the flying community, of course, you have aircraft operators, language requirements are there, so the is of course here and there room for improvement, but there are English requirements and phraseologies to be used. Of course, you have in different environments also general aviation, helicopter operations, and other, let's say, flying operators on the control zone. But interesting to see, because if we talk about Tripple One, as stated before, it's of course also related to the communication between the tower and pilots, but the main impact or main change would be on the ground operators on the activities which are on or close to a runway. What we try here is to get an overview and a little discussion what ground operators are actually operating at each airport. And it's of course, if you work at a specific airport, you know everything very in detail of your specific airport. But for us, it was interesting to see the different types of operations which took place or which frequently take place on or close to a runway. So what operations do we have? Of course, we have the airport who is obliged to ensure the safety or the safe status of the runway. Therefore, you do runway inspections, which is usually done by a unit of the airport operator, duty manager, or operations unit. We have wildlife control at some airports being present on the runway or on the runway strip, for example. You see major difference between airports. At some airports to really do inspections driving along the runway. At some airports, the placing on runway strip area. At some airports, they do not access any time runway environment if it's not required during the runway operations. Times of active run. There are certain maintenance activities requiring access to the runway. So one part is, let's say, everything what is related to the aerodrome itself. So fixing things, small repairs, light maintenance on the runway. Not so much looking on big maintenance and big rehabilitation projects, because then at that time the runway is handed over to the airport operator and it's out of, let's say, the control of the ATC. At some airports, you have maintenance of the ANSP or the MET service. Let's say not only accessing the runway, but crossing the runway, for example, to access any installations or facilities which are on the other side of the runway. Firefighting, of course, not only an emergency, but also at some airports, regulatory practicing on a runway or doing also some tasks which are associated to, let's say, the inspection or monitoring of the safety status of the runway. Winter service, of course, anti-icing, de-icing, snow removal activities, usually in convoys. Then it's always the question how this is managed. Is the runway activated, not activated during this time? And at some airports, it's also relevant that those vehicles have to cross the runway to access another runway. Because these big machines not always fit on perimeter roads, which access or provides access to remote areas of the airports or areas which are far away or behind the runway. Grass mowing, all the maintenance and habitat management, which is taking place on runway strip areas. And there, of course, it's interesting or relevant whether they are within, let's say, the runway safety area, whether it's a graded portion of the runway, or if it's the, let's say, extended line of the holding positions, of the runway holding positions. Some airports easily recognizable by the service roads you have there. At other airports, there are no, let's say, fixed infrastructural indications on what is the limit. And then it's, of course, interesting to see what's the relevance in terms of situational awareness for pilots or not, and what certificates and licenses these drivers have, because then we talk, of course, of a very completely different group of people who has to be trained and where the training has to be maintained. For those airports where you have, due to the layout requirement or where it is necessary that aircraft are pulled from one area to the other area, and then they have to cross the runway. Here, it's interesting that you have contractors, ground handlers doing this task and requiring this line sets. Of course, then it extends your group of those who would require English to another group. Some airports, it's the CAA, might also have license to access runway areas. Follow me's, and I'm sure you can add this list with a lot of other activities. At some airports, is security, might access the runway, military, training activities. So there's a very huge, let's say, group of stakeholders, which is very individual for each aerodrome who have access. And why I'm stating this here is, first, what is, let's say, the operational and safety relevance for situational awareness on runway environments? And on the other hand, what group of people you have to train at the end, or you have to, let's say, guarantee that they understand and can communicate on this frequency. So at many airports, the feedback what we get, of course, the airport operators itself, the runway inspections, this is the group which goes most frequent out on the runway. So there's a lot of practice and, let's say, standard operations. To some extent, it's managed throughout the day. So you have the 4 inspections, dedicated times, everyone, and it's somehow a coordinated and a routine procedure. If you look, for example, on firefighting, so some airports they go out on a frequent basis, but maybe not that often. And I think many airport operators also stated this is one of the most difficult groups. If you want to train them in English, they are really good in firefighting and on a technical level. But adding them, let's say, the requirement to train them in English is at most airports or many airports the major challenge to achieve. So just to give you a slight overview of what groups we are talking here, which would then be covered by a potential implementation of Tripple One. And I think also a very interesting question is, do these activities happen on an actively used runway, or is this runway for this time where this activity takes place non-active, which means that ATC or the tower approach do not, let's say, send or clear any aircraft on this runway. So it might be under responsibility of the ATC. You could also add a third box saying this runway is completely out of service, which is handed over to the airport operator. But actually for this second box, you should not have, or in very rare cases, have any pilots on this dedicated one-way tower frequency. So this is, I think, interesting to see and interesting or relevant to consider that this is also differently managed at various airports, but must be, let's say, considered or factored in when we discuss which groups and what are the benefits and what are the additional risks and how can we manage to implement procedures in this context. In terms of activities, we categorized 3 main activities. Actually, those safety-related tasks which has to be done on the runway inspections, to fix things on the runway, to intervene if some events happened on the runway, to collect FOD, or to access any sites. Most frequent inspections, and those inspections, as I said before, is something what could be planned to some extent, and also as it is recommended to coordinate this with the traffic stream and to arrange that there's to manage so that there's a gap in the traffic flow to allow for runway inspection at that time. Why is this interesting or relevant in this context? Because then it's not only a gap on the traffic flow, it's also a gap or more space what you have on your frequency where you can accommodate this communication with this one-way inspection activities. Activities in the runway safety areas, and there you can think of, let's say, the closest trip weighted portion. If you think at low visibility operations, the safety areas could also be different. If you think of critical areas, you can also think of roads, let's say, passing through critical areas, which are actually considered as runway safety relevant, where you would need an approval or some coordination with the tower to access or to pass through all these activities on the grass. What happened, and I think here, in many cases, identification of the boundary, and also the interesting question, what is the relevance when we discuss the benefits of this concept? And I think one important aspect, crossing of runways, not only by aircraft, but also by ground vehicle operators, tows, vehicles, equipment, which has to be repositioned from one side to another side, where you cannot guarantee or not provide any perimeter solution, perimeter taxiway or perimeter road, so that you can take out this traffic which is actually always the best option just to avoid this traffic. But in those cases where it is unavoidable and it is one of the most critical items when it comes to, let's say, the saturation or congestion of the frequency load, for example, of the frequency itself. Because this is something what happens not that much planned. So the vehicle or the tow appears in this moment, and then you have to feed this into your traffic stream, and this is actually what comes on top to all the aviation traffic in those situations where you have high traffic peaks, for example. And you have a short process time, which means that whenever you have a lot of steps to take in a tower, for example, then you have to do a lot of tasks within a short time. You always short time on the frequency. So this is, let's say, a completely different setup and type of operations as compared to a runway inspection, for example. So we've seen a lot of different concepts, and we tried to point out here the most important parameters. And I think whenever it comes to cross-runway operations, whenever it comes to crossing runway configuration, when there's a lot of traffic crossing the runway, these are always arguments or rationales to say, okay, this is something where we want to keep both runways on one frequency, and where we always have, let's say, the objection that if we add another group of operators on this frequency, that we then come to a point where we would have issues with the congestion or saturation of the frequency. I think this is just to bring it to one slide to point out the most prominent, let's say, reasons or rationales why to keep vehicles on a separate frequency, and why to, let's say, combine runways on one single frequency is whenever you have this parallel dependent and crossing runway system. Frequency congestion, of course, language is one of the main issues. How do we bring these groups of operators on a good and appropriate language level that they can operate in this, safely operate in this environment without any big risk of miscommunication? A big aspect was also, let's say, the history and the experience shows that, yes, we have runway incursions, we track them, we investigate them. There are runway incursions involving vehicles as well, and we have this mapped on our hazard list, and we deal with it. But in the analysis, we see that the communication itself, and when the communication would be on a same frequency, would not have prevented or affected positively these occurrences. This is, of course, out of a safety management perspective of your organization or one organization, one of the reasons or one of the points to consider how and what where we take action in a proactive manner to change things. And, of course, considering technical and procedural safety barriers which are already there or which are discussed or about to be implemented. So, of course, Tripple One is not the only thing which we do or which the aviation community does to counteract runway incursions and also by vehicles. So there's a whole set. So I come to the next slide. What is being done or possibly done to positively influence this hazard and risk. So here's one quote of one of the answers on the survey, which I think is worth to note or interesting and representing a feedback what we have in many cases. So from a safety management perspective, there's no reason to consider the local language as a hazard, as there are no investigation conclude that any safety occurrences involve the use of local language. Furthermore, we consider it a risk to introduce foreign language requirements as a standard, as the majority of our personnel is currently not experienced and have low English language skills. Hence, we consider introduction of English requirements a risk to flight safety. And I think this statement represents a lot the controversial situation of this concept. Yes, you can achieve situation awareness. You have the challenge to bring people on this level. Of course, it requires training. It requires that people are being prepared to communicate in an aviation channel or aviation radio environment. But this could also be, let's say, the risk for implementation, for successful implementation. And of course, if this process, if this training, let's say, of course, is there to achieve a high standard, but you always will have, let's say, the risk that those groups which are less experienced, less routined to bring on the frequency, that you could add risks on the other side. So other safety barriers, I think training is one of the most important factors. We'll also mention during the workshops, people need to be prepared, not only about communication, drivers, how they navigate, how they behave. I think this is a big aspect, irrespective of the language. The phraseology is key for an effective and good communication, preventing errors in communication. Infrastructural measures, of course, avoiding traffic crossing a runway by implementing perimeter roads or any perimeter options is a good way, but also visual aids, namely stop bars, the taxiway design, how markings and signs are provided. It's another measure. Also considering it's not only aircraft operating there, but also vehicles operating there. Interesting factor, for example, if you think of runways in a crossed configuration, and you have vehicles operating on one runway, how do they identify the crossing point or the safe distance to the crossing point to the other runway? Procedures, how we coordinate the activities on active, non-active runways. How can we pre-coordinate this somehow to, let's say, take the stress out of the frequency? Technical applications to enhance the situational awareness of drivers, as we've seen that also many occurrences happen due to disorientation or to let's say the uncertainty of position. There are very smart solutions out there, moving maps also including the position of other aircraft on the airfield, which actually provides the driver a very good picture of the situation, not only where you are, but also where others are, which helps you to build up your mental picture. Surveillance systems, especially if you consider airports with, let's say, easier or not easier, but less complex operations, smaller airports, remote airports. I mean, there are airports out there without any additional surveillance sensor systems, whether it is ground movement radar, MLAT transponders, or vehicles equipped with transponders. Definitely an important point to enhance runway safety. Memory aids, we've seen that as one of the findings of the case at the beginning. Vehicle progress strips, electronic flight strip systems, very smart solutions and functionalities, what we've seen, also including status indication for controllers. Are there vehicles currently blocking and operating on the runway? And this is actually certain tools out there where you clearly indicate this runway is blocked. This information is available to approach to all the controllers. Everyone is aware of the situation, just to prevent the ATCO error of permitting or allowing two different operations to occur on the runway. Of course, then more advanced system, if you think of follow the green, if you think of alerting systems, detecting errors when aircraft or vehicle infringe certain safety barriers or safety areas, different technologies out there. And not so many of these one-way status lights are implemented yet. So in Europe, it's only a small number of airports having this. But I know that some airports considering this tool, which is actually also there to give indications to the different operators what is the status of the one-way. So without going too much into detail on each of these, but actually coming back to one of the theses at the beginning, other safety nets might have a more significant impact on one-way incursions. So this is definitely an important discussion to take also. It's not only about one mitigation, one layer, one cheese slice in the safety system of an airport. It's discussing and seeing what is well-calibrated, multi-layered safety network to counteract against one-way incursions. Okay, so these are the discussions and the summary of the discussions and the insights. Unfortunately, we're not able to discuss all different concepts which are, let's say, out there, but it's certainly some interesting insights. And what we want to take now is to look at one specific airport who actively decided to implement Tripple One some years ago, and to see what the journey was, what is the experience and the challenges, and how did they manage this. And yeah, let's look at process, how they did it, and would actually hand over the mic and kindly ask to release the mic to Davy van Hufte, who will give us some insights about the experience in Brussels. Hello, Davy. Nice to have you here.
Hi, Jan. Dear all, good noon in the meanwhile. Thank you for allowing us this time to present on the experience we have while implementing the Tripple One at Brussels. Can immediately proceed to the content slide. I will first present you some history, how comes that we have implemented it at Brussels Airport. Some information on the training that we organize to manage this, to get the best results out of it. Some insights on an airside driving simulator that we use, and the challenges that we have as well. Next slide. So after some occurrences took place end of the 90s, early 2000, it was considered that there was a need for an extra layer of safety defenses that had to be applied here in Brussels. The incidents that took place were incidents where there were really misunderstandings between people working on runways and taxiways in the terrain, doing their daily job, and air traffic controllers on the tower. At the time, you will understand the safety management systems were not implemented already, or not, at least not that mature, working that mature as the management systems work today. And so at the time, also reporting systems were there, but not that adequate already. And it was very difficult to find back the real occurrence description and investigation results for these occurrences. But anyhow, at the time, it was decided to bring together a group of people from the airport, from our ANSP, from the CAA, and also external advisors. And there it was considered that the implementation of the Tripple One concept would be a step forward and achieve a better level of runway safety here in Brussels. First steps we took was considering what phraseology we would apply and how to train it to the vehicle drivers that were involved. Define who to train, who needs to be allowed on the runway area, the maneuvering area, and who does not. It's a basic principle to achieve safety. Only allow the people that have the real need to be there and to do their daily work in contact with ATC. And some next steps, of course, drafting the training material, the procedures, finding trainers that were qualified to give the training to our vehicle drivers, and also the implementation together with the ANSP of the one frequency on the one active runway. Then step by step, the implementation was done, vehicle drivers were trained, and gradually on, it was a higher maturity and application of only a limited set of standard ICAO words, and phraseology was implemented and got successful. Next slide. So then it was decided to implement it not only on the runway and the protected area of the runway, but also on taxiways that give access, entry or exit to runways. I will come back later and I will visualize that on a map. So also change management had to take place. Also changes for the NSP were there, of course. And here I need to apologize. There got a small mistake in the presentation. The vehicle drivers were no longer on trunked radio. So they got on VHF radio and they did not communicate anymore on trunked radio with the tower, as was the situation before. Also, the ground frequency was integrated in the runway frequency. I will show you that. And in fact, there was no opposition, only collaboration with our ANSP, ATC, because it was considered to be high added value to the level of safety. So, as my introduction already explained, in end of 90s, early 2000s, we had some occurrences that were having an impact of applying different languages. Different languages that we have here in Belgium. We have Dutch, French, and German local languages spoken over here. But we are all working from different regions on the same airport, on the same terrain. And also from the ATC perspective, more controllers had also different native languages spoken, but of course they are trained, and they are also trained in the full package of ICAO phraseology, of course. We should not forget that at the time in Belgium also a serious rail accident took place, a big fatality accident. And after the investigation, it became clear that also part of root cause was that two people being there in that rail system, having safety responsibilities, failed to understand each other because of not understanding each other's local native language. Then we introduced maps in the vehicles, and we have also developed radio frequency zones in vehicles. Next slide. So this is the visualization of the terrain and the areas that we have developed and agreed with ATC. This map is also published in Aerodrome Manual and all local procedures of the stakeholders that are involved, and has also been integrated in the Belgium AIP. As you see on the north side, we have a ground and an air north frequency with dedicated frequencies that are foreseen on the radios that are built in the vehicles. We have the south area, and then we have also, of course, ATIS and spare frequencies. But The frequencies are activated based on the use of the runways. So it means that if the south runway is used, dedicated frequency will be coupled to that. If the north runway is used, another frequency will be coupled. And if we have crossing runways, namely 01 and 07 right, then it is considered to work on one frequency. As you see, that the controller needs to have control over crossing runway operation. Next slide, please. Training, of course, a challenge. Work with people that are in the early 2000s, not always even educated and used to learn English and speak or work with the English language. Native Dutch, native French, native German speaking, and start to train them from a very basic level, but consider that it is required to only learn a very basic standard and limited set of words, the phonetic alphabet, and a couple of standard phrases. That was required to have a standardized training program, and so also a clear agreement with our ATC, where we regularly evaluate the use of that limited set of words and phrases, and if these words are still efficient and safe to use. The need was formalized to have more situational awareness for both the vehicle drivers, ATC, and pilots. It was managing the lack of standard phraseology by vehicle drivers in even native and local language. And it responded to the lack of knowledge of procedures on the maneuvering area. Yes, next slide. Next slide, please. Who do we provide training to, and who need to succeed in the theoretical and practical learnings and testing? Of course, the ones who need to operate on a day-to-day basis and fulfill their responsibilities and tasks in this maneuvering area. So bigger groups towing the operational services and also the infrastructural services, of course. Next slide. The training, just to give you insights on that, we do not provide it as phraseology training. We inherit in a runway incursion prevention program that we have, and that includes more training than only the standard basic set of ICAO phraseology and procedures, of course. So the recurrency is 2 years for the regular vehicle drivers, but for about 50 of them who are external workers and help us with winter operations. If it gets winter in Belgium, at least, they are trained every year again, just because of this reason that they cannot achieve a high level of experience and knowledge while driving on the terrain. Next slide. So the initial training is based on theoretical training, classroom with instructors, a theoretical test. Then practical training, where we use a mixture of live training on the terrain, but we minimize that to not create new or other risks in the operational traffic. Excuse me. And we work with now for already a couple of years with airside driver simulators, where the people can train in a real Brussels airport environment. We have developed a three-dimensional model, so it can be used with reference to the real situation outside in different situations. Next slide. And then for the recurrency, of course, we focus on repeating the basic procedures. Now, the training topics on communication. We have ground vehicle communication. We do training on the radio frequencies. We have the procedural words and phrases. We train them on the aviation phonetic alphabet, typical aviation terminology that can be applied in the context of driving a vehicle or being present on the maneuvering area. And then, of course, the specific procedures to contact ATC, tell them who you are, where you are, what your intentions are, and be able to understand the instructions of ATC. That would be insufficient. Next slide. That would be insufficient. Standard phrases are there to learn them and communicate, to drive in a convoy, to do a radio check procedure, or report a radio failure. Specific sentence to communicate that you are lost. Emergency communications, vehicle breakdown, and also the use of the transponder that we have. Next slide. So, fortunately, I cannot show you already other pictures. We have a challenge that we are now changing to a new version of the simulator. This was the first version. Already many people from other airports have visited us to view it live and to see how we work with it. We give training on this. We test on the simulator. We can simulate very specific situations. We can simulate the specific routes that are mostly used or standardly used by aircraft towers. We can simulate wintry conditions and low visibility, for example. That all brings experience and situational awareness for the trainees and the vehicle drivers. And of course, we have available the simulator to help people with the aerodrome familiarization. So the challenge, next slide, last slide, the challenge now and in the future, first on board the new simulator. We are preparing for that. We will roll out the system the big early summer, end of spring, early summer next year. And then we start the transition, the conversion to the new simulator with the trainers and the trainees. And of course, what the challenge is to keep continuously the focus on the correct use of phraseology, together with ATC, have evaluation moments, do runway incursion investigations, always consider the human factors that can be, maybe may have been there in the incursion, and also the language issues that may have played part. And of course, keep the level up. And we are looking forward together with all of you, I think, to what exactly the implementation will be of the English language proficiency that will come up later. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Davy, for your insights and your explanations about the experience and the approach you took at Brussels Airport. It was very interesting to see, and I think many out of the community appreciate to get this insights and experience for this journey. And so before we go to the last, let's say, step or last aspect of this presentation, I want just to mention that you can ask or put your questions in the Q&A or chat section of the webinar. So after the considerations regarding the benefits and risks, we will pick up the questions and try to give you a good feedback on that and to see whether we can solve these questions. So you can already type in your questions so that we can proceed then directly to the discussion on the Q&A session. So benefit and risk analysis, as stated in the beginning. So this is the next step. So we have now a lot of information, a lot of discussions we did, and discussing the pros and the cons and the different implications by implementing Tripple One at certain airport environments. And this is actually now the path to get into more detailed analysis. It's obvious that there are benefits on the pro side, enhancing situational awareness on the one side, but there are also counterparts on the safety side, which could, which we already seen in terms of language proficiency, about the arrangements and the setup of the frequency, how big is the load on the frequency, and what does it do with the let's say with the people involved in this environment and their work and their behavior. These are the steps what we will do now after Christmas, let's say in more detail, which will keep us busy for the next or the first quarter of next year. And actually the core question at the end, what is, let's say, the bigger weight on the benefit or on the risk side? There are certainly some implementation risks or challenges, which Davey also highlighted and we also mentioned before. Of course, you need to invest into training. There might be other investments necessary, whether it's equipment, whether it's, let's say, also adjusting procedures on a tower unit, for example. At some airport, it has implications on the setup and on the, let's say, map of frequencies and the sectors of frequencies. It might bring up this discussion that there might be adjustments and redesign, which is, of course, another big process behind. But at this part, we look at, let's say, the safety benefits and the safety risks, safety hazards and risks, not too much looking on the costs at this stage. Of course, it's an important aspect which will be considered in the study in the next steps. Okay, when we look at the benefits, I think discussed quite a lot, and I think this is already in the objective and on the background of Tripple One concept. It's actually two major items we identified and listed down as a sense of the discussions or the workshops we have. So what we can do in terms of benefits, we can establish an environment of shared communication of safety relevant information of all the activities and stakeholders in one-way environment. Of course, we must see it's one important and say crucial when it comes to potential risk of collisions, assets and area what we have in the airport one-way environment. We have high speeds and short distances to react, which is a little bit of difference maybe if you look at an airspace environment. So this is actually the big benefit for bringing together all communications on one channel and one language, what everyone understands. So some aspects for pilots and drivers. So pilots, of course, enabling them, drivers and pilots, to have a kind of a cross-check ability. So which means that you have the layer that the pilot, for example, can hear and understand what clearances are given to other participants in the runway environment, vehicles, for example, and then, let's say, have a mental picture and check whether this clearance makes sense or not, or is this something what fits together with my expectations in this moment. So it gives an idea about the presence and location of vehicles, what's the current runway status. Of course, this is kind of information which is mostly also already forwarded by traffic information from controllers to pilots. What we found out is this is a common practice at most airports with a lot of traffic, that this information is passed through to pilots. So, for example, that you can expect a late landing clearance as there's runway inspection on process, but will vacate soon. So then the pilot is prepared on the situation and know what's going on. And let's say by having Tripple One, you would give them the ability to cross-check and to verify the situation, and that the situation evolves like you would expect. And to anticipate and prepare for any other actions or activating other procedures. Faster problem identification. Of course, you won't have let's say you will have one step in communication less, especially if you have procedures in the tower where you have two controllers, one taking care of vehicles, one taking care of aircraft. Then you, let's say, have one communication process less, which also enhanced, let's say, the situational awareness or the awareness of this particular controller. So because you have only one person knowing what's going on his or her runway. So safety culture, of course, it's also an important aspect. Vehicle drivers, of course, you will enhance then the understanding for them what's going on the other side, or the other participants, other operators, and let's say increase the understanding and behavior in these situations. Standardization is another aspect, procedures, communication, hardware, so common language patterns. So of course this would have the advantage as of now as a pilot. If you fly across Europe, you have different communication concept when it comes to vehicle operations at different airports. It's certainly a topic how this communication is dealt on a common frequency, on a different frequency. At some airports, if I fly to Brussels, I hear the vehicle on the same frequency. If I fly to another airport, I don't hear it, and I don't know what's going on, even though if I see something. So this is definitely also one part, or one aspect, what can be considered as a benefit in this context, harmonization. On the downside, so we discussed a lot with airports having not implemented yet, or not having implemented Triple One concept at their airports, or any variation of Triple One concept. What would this mean? So just imagine that we would implement with some training preparation, with a program to prepare this implementation, would implement this in, I don't know, 1 year time or 1.5 year time. So what additional hazards would we bring into the system, what we have to manage and to deal with? And the let's say conclusion or the output of this discussion, we tried to summarize and systemize the let's say discussions or the points which brought up in the discussions and the workshops, and to define some hazards, and let's say what is the undesirable event connected to this hazard, and to give a roughly understanding what would be a change in the hazard situation from status quo to a Triple One scenario. Basically, we have 6 hazards which we identified and described so far, which I will show you quickly now. This is, let's say, our current status of work, which we'll definitely refine in the next couple of weeks and months. First hazard will associate it with the number of transmissions on the tower frequency. Whenever you bring a new group onto the tower frequency, there will be more transmissions because they make their calls on this frequency. So frequency load will rise, and this could negatively affect the availability of the frequency and quick reactions by controllers. It's not only more transmissions itself, so I mean it's all under the aspect there's more communication on the one frequency. There are also more stakeholders, so which could negatively affect one or the other group with having more information exchanged on this frequency. This could be on the pilot side, it could be on the vehicle driver side, and this particular environment. There are more topics communicated and discussed on this channel. Insufficient English language skills. I think this is one of the major points. So how can we get drivers and different groups in an airport environment to a sufficient level of English to effectively communicate and to avoid any miscommunication in the environment, which is certainly on the one side an implementation risk. You need to take efforts to train them. I think it's not a good idea, or it's certainly more challenging to do this without any preparational trainings. So insufficient English language skills is definitely one of the aspects which we should focus on here as well. We put another hazard in there, which is higher training qualification requirements, which is on one side an implementation risk because you have higher requirements to your staff. You need to consider this in the hiring process. Certainly some people would not be that well qualified or able to learn English or to learn a certain level of English, which could effectively result in a situation where you have, let's say, a lack of personnel in safety critical environments at airports. So then you face the challenge, okay, those people I have, depending on the background of those people and structure, maybe some of them would not pass the test. How do I deal with this? And in a worst case or in a bad case, it could result that you have less personnel and then you face the challenge how to deal with that. Two other risks or hazards which we identified, which are actually more closely connected to the one runway, one frequency aspects, which actually in some airports, we've seen the example in Brussels, 3 runways, there are 2 frequency environments. If you consider the approach to have in this situation that we would have 3 different frequencies, even though the runways are dependent and also crossing in a crossing configuration, then we would, of course, take the hazard that the communication from one runway would not be available to those operators on the other runway, which is, of course, an important piece of situational awareness because there are dependencies from one to the other. And, of course, you would have the challenge to put let's say in this in this scenario, more frequency on the map, more frequencies, more sectors, of course, more transfer from one to another frequency, which actually the result means also more communication and more load on the frequency. Okay, this is just to give you an outlook or an idea, the types of hazards, risk and benefits, what we analyzed or identified so far. And actually, we're done with the presentation part and would like to use the remaining minutes to tackle some of the questions which came in on the chat or Q&A section. And I'm just looking to decide whether there are some questions which we can tackle now. If not, there's always the possibility to contact us after the webinar, after the workshop to ask questions or give some input. Okay. Just checking with the team here, which question we can take. So just had a quick look on the Q&A. So I think there are some questions, if I understand correctly, addressed to Brussels Airport today. We may be a good position. First question would be, how many occurrences related to misunderstanding have you got since you implemented the one language rule at your aerodrome?
Good afternoon again. Based on reporting and investigation 1. So there was a misunderstanding with newly released vehicle drivers, with a misunderstanding with the words "go ahead." That's many years ago, and in the meanwhile, it's no longer used as standard phraseology in general.
Okay, thank you. Another question, can you briefly explain the one runway part of the Tripple One concept and effect on crossing runways? Very interesting question, what we often ask ourselves or ask within the course of the study. So if we look at the definition, one way, one frequency, one language, there is, let's say, the part or the discussion about whether or not a one-way or if you have a multiple one-way system, that one-ways are sharing or share a frequency, or if there should be always one frequency for one particular runway. So I think, Davey, if you know if this was under discussion in Brussels Airport, otherwise I say some generic words about that.
It is based on the runway configuration you apply and on the need to have traffic on the same frequency from a situational awareness perspective, of course. But anyhow, when we have the crossing runway operations, it's one controller who does the operations, because it's one person who has control on the operations that are in a crossing configuration executed, and vehicle drivers are joining in this area also on the same frequency, just to have the awareness of the organization and use of traffic of both runways.
Yeah. So it's actually a part what we also discussed, especially at those airports where you have crossing runway configuration. It's, let's say, a common setup that you have a shared frequency for both runways. And I think that's at most airports with this configuration. It's a little bit different if you have parallel runways, which might even not be dependent. So then it's usually a single controller for each of those runways. If you have dependencies, then it's very common to have a shared controller position or one controller position taking care of both. So this is the status quo. We do analyze and evaluate whether this aspect has a positive influence on the overall objective of enhancing situational awareness. Because as I said at the end, there are some hazards associated with particular this change if you would go for that. So you would lose situational awareness actually from things which go on the other runway. So at some airports where the crossing runway is, let's say, the secondary runway, it might be in some cases a different situation as opposed to other airports where both runways are highly used. So it will be evaluated, but from let's say the narrow sense of the idea of Tripple One, it's more focused about one runway and having a shared frequency of all participants on one language. So I think, especially for those airports with cross runways, I think that's a tricky point. Another question, do you conduct exams for driving license on simulator as well? And do you conduct and process English language exams during training? I think, Davey, again, that's one for you.
Can you repeat that question,
Yes,
please? Because I cannot find that in the...
If you go in the Q&A session in the top bar, if you see that.
I'm in there, but I don't see the specific question.
It's a question from Bartholomew 16 minutes ago. I can repeat it. Do you conduct exams for driving license on simulator as well? Maybe we start with that one. Do you do exams with the simulator?
Yes.
And do you conduct English language exams during training?
It's not really English language exams, as are already other questions in relation to English language proficiency. It's not really an English language examination. It is an ICAO phraseology test that we organize, where we test the vehicle drivers for being able to use that limited set of words and sentences that are in agreement with our ATC used on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you. And as I said to this question, how many phrases or words do drivers need to learn? So
It is one page. It's one page with the ICAO phonetic alphabet numbers, and then from the total list of phraseology that is there in SERA or Annexten or other references, it is only one A4 leaflet, in fact, less, even less. So the standard words, and then with these words we have built standard, short, easy to speak and understand sentences on specific situations. And to confirm and already maybe reply to another question, today we cannot consider the level of English proficiency in Brussels being at level 4. That's something completely different. And when we have to go to ICAO level 4, English language proficiency, we also will have a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. So it's actually, to put it in the picture of the bar of different language, let's say, levels. Actually, the last step is a real big step to take from, let's say, having this set of phraseology tailored for this environment, for the task, and then taking this step towards level 4.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. One question, what does the concept mean with vehicles partially on the tower frequency? I think this refers to the overview of the different setups of frequencies. As I think it was number 2 from the top. This actually means, or this is what we found at certain airports, that you have a group, let's say a core group, for example, one-way inspections being on this particular tower frequency, but you have other stakeholders or operators which are still on a separate trunk radio, for example, channel. So this is, let's say, an observation of the different concepts. Yeah. Also, let's say, considering the difference between regular task, standard task, and non-planned and non-standard task, quick interventions, something like this. Okay, I'm going back. So now a question from Ansgar. Will your recommendations include a list of conditions that need to be met to make Tripple One beneficial, and hence, if they are not met, the risk would be outweigh the benefits? So the study itself also looks on what prerequisites need to be fulfilled to enable Tripple One. So I think, as mentioned before, it's not a good idea just to say tomorrow we make Tripple One, we change frequency and all come in there. So there need some preparations on that. There need to be some prerequisites to be fulfilled in order to make it successful, or to manage, let's say, also the hazards and risks what I just showed before. So yes, there will be some prerequisites or conditions which have to be considered or recommended, or in which way if a path to Tripple One would be made. So it's at the end a balance. Yes, the benefits. I think there are some risks which also potentially jeopardize benefits. So if there's a bad English skill, bad radio discipline, then of course it negatively impacts also the benefit of having situation awareness, because if it's unclear communication, then you won't have it. Yeah. I hope this answers this question, and how these outweigh or the additional risk outweigh the benefits. I think this is one important part of the analysis. Of course, how can we make this consideration, or how can we make this evaluation? What outweighs the other? And this is certainly a question which is, let's say, very locally specific, because many of the challenges and the parameters and aspects which we discussed here have a direct impact on the benefits and risks. So, and all parameters, operational context is different from one airport to another. It's a different situation and a different result if you look at the benefits and risk on a smaller airport environment with a smaller, let's say, setup of protections, safety barriers, small operations. On the other side, you have not so many people you need to train, but maybe they have different backgrounds. They take multi-roles and their jobs. They do other tasks at the airports. So it's a completely different discussion, actually. So this is, I think, also worth to consider in this context. So what would happen if an unusual occurrence happens, which is not part of the phrases you teach? So interesting question also here. So of course, idea or the concepts of having a basic set is, let's say, considering the fact that vehicle operations on a runway are in most cases limited to, let's say, entering the area, leaving the area, making position reports, how to deal with requesting position information and such standard and basic things. Interesting is what would you do or how the procedure is designed to communicate and to interact whenever something unusual happens. So this is also very locally specific. Maybe Davey can some insights how this is being managed in Brussels. But from the typical radio telephony procedures, you always would have, in theory, the option to fall back to your national language to interact and communicate from vehicle driver, for example, to the controller to explain a different situation, which is actually then taking out the understanding of the pilot. So he or she wouldn't understand at this part, but maybe is aware that there is something unusual. Yeah. So then it's a little bit balancing what would be your additional efforts to enable someone to take over this unusual, abnormal communication versus what will be really the benefit on the other side. So, but these are locally specific procedures which need to be foreseen and which has to be considered in the procedures. Okay, I think considering the time, as we're 6 minutes past 1, let's take one last question, and which is addressed to Brussels. Davey, maybe you can take this one. Do you have? Oh, Davey's gone. Do you have English proficiency as a prerequisite requirement when hiring new staff? As Davey certainly, I don't know if someone else from Brussels is in there, take over these questions, but we're happy to give you the answer after the session, whether or not people who want to start work at Brussels airports need to have English as a prerequisite already. Okay. Good. Considering the time, I see that there are some questions or remarks on the chat function, which could manage now to tackle both of them all in completely, which shows that we collect these questions and give a comprehensive feedback after the session to all who registered and enrolled to the session, and so that we can give you the full feedback and all answers you have in this context. So, 3 intense hours, I think. So thank you very much for joining and also for those who stayed until now. And so I hope you get some insightful information and that you also have some food for thoughts, let's say, for your own discussions. And I think, yeah, we can be excited where this journey goes and what the next steps will take out of the study. And whenever there's something what you want to contribute or bring in, feel free to reach out. So thank you very much for your contribution, for the questions, and I apologize if we couldn't answer them right now. And yeah, that's all from us today, and hope to continue discussion in the community for the next steps. Thank you very much.